Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Share Series Monday Management Update. I'm John Ragazzino, and joining me today is Sunny Trin, the co-founder and CEO of DevvStream Holdings. DevvStream is a leading carbon credit project co-development and generation firm specializing in technology-based solution. And we'll hand it over to Sunny to give you a brief overview, and then we'll go into some Q&A.
Great. No, thanks, John. Yeah, so like John said, DevvStream, we are a company that helps other companies, organizations, and even governments generate revenue from doing things that help the environment. So we do this by helping them generate carbon credits with a focus on technology, like John said, technology-based solutions. These groups love this because we don't charge them a penny, so it's no risk for them. Instead, we make our money by taking a portion of the carbon credits when we generate them. So we're going in and doing things that a lot of them are not familiar with, because most carbon credits to this point are focused around nature-based. We instead focus on the technology side, and there's a lot of really interesting technologies out there as well too. So we work with all types of organizations, cities, municipalities, states, provinces, and even countries.
Okay, great. Can you tell us a little bit, just from a high level, I want to talk about the carbon credit markets in general. So first off, what are the carbon credit markets and why is that relevant to investors?
Yeah, so starting off, I mean, for those that aren't aware of carbon credits, the way to look at it is we all know that global warming is a massive problem, with the main cause coming from greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon dioxide. So to address it, the United Nations and countries throughout the globe have created emissions reduction goals and have signed agreements to meet them. Along with these goals, they created a financial mechanism called carbon credits that would reward activities that reduce carbon emissions. And we all know that in order for us to make any kind of change, and global climate change, addressing it is a massive issue that involves everybody, right? Every organization, country, and individual in the world. In order to really encourage this change, you need some kind of economic incentive. And that's where the carbon credits come in. So anytime an organization or a country does something that eliminates, avoids, or sequesters carbon from the air, they would receive 1 carbon credit for every metric ton that they reduce. Then for companies or countries that have excessive emissions, they would need to buy carbon credits for every ton that they're above a regulatory threshold or a voluntary goal. And this money then is used to help advance these technologies or these solutions and projects that help reduce the carbon. And these goals for us to get close to net zero is by no means small. It's estimated that we will need to reduce 23 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually by 2030, and roughly 12.5 of those tons will be driven by carbon credits. So this is why the carbon credits market is already massive and continuing to grow. So the market is estimated to be $1.16 trillion this year in 2023, growing to 2.6 to 8 trillion by 2028.
That's helpful. And just to talk a little bit more specifically about the structure, the way, and this is just for the understanding of the investors, that I know it was a little confusing when I first learned it when we started working with you, but there's the compliance-based market, and then there's the voluntary market, and within the voluntary market, there are nature-based and technology-based solutions. Can you kind of walk us through the high-level differentiation between compliance versus voluntary, and then within voluntary where you play, nature versus technology, please?
Sure. No, that's a good question, John. So in the compliance market, they occur in certain regions or countries that have regulatory requirements on emission levels. For companies and organizations that emit above a certain threshold, they will get taxed. In order to avoid this tax, they can buy carbon credits that are eligible to offset that excess emissions. So for example, in some countries, organizations, they're allowed to emit only up to 50,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Anything above that, they would get taxed for. So there's usually a program of different activities that are eligible for carbon credits. And the carbon market, the regulatory market for carbon credits is much larger than voluntary right now. It makes up about 900 billion of that 1.16 trillion, if not more. And the value of these credits are much higher as well too. So that's an important distinction, because we participate in the compliance market and actually help shape it. We work with a lot of government agencies as well to ensure that the projects that we are doing could be or will become eligible for compliance credits, because again, the demand's higher and the value's higher. Voluntary on the other space is when organizations, they voluntarily provide and make carbon reductions and net zero goals. So there's no government that's requiring them to do so. Instead, it's the market that that's really pressuring them and their end clients. So when you have companies like Microsoft or Google saying that they're carbon neutral, well, they're not required by the government to do that. They're doing it because, again, investors such as the institutional investors, like I think BlackRock mentioned that they would invest in anybody with a negative, a really bad ESG score, right, or a bad carbon footprint. So in order for those groups to invest in them, these companies would be very proactive about reducing their carbon footprint, and carbon credits is a big piece of that. So they buy voluntary credits because they do by choice. Okay, John.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the specifics around pricing within the carbon credit markets, and you've broken down the structure a bit, but just tell me a little bit about the generation of what we call, more high quality credits versus some of the less quality, and how that impacts pricing across the different markets.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, this is a big market, right? We were talking over $1 trillion. Whenever you have a market this size with some really valuable assets, you're gonna get some bad players as well too. So there are organizations out there that will generate carbon credits that maybe don't provide the true impact that they're claiming, and hence those credits, without the proper validation and verification and auditing, and the ones that aren't being issued by governing bodies that are widely accepted, well, those credits are considered much lower quality because they don't meet certain high level criteria. So those would sell for maybe a dollar, a couple of dollars here or there. High quality credits, they get audited by third parties. They're issued by registries that are widely and globally accepted, and they meet certain criteria through different organizations that are like checkboxes that say, yeah, these are credits that go through the proper quantification. The data that's generated is very precise. And this is where like our technology credits fit. We do a lot of that as well to ensure that our credits are the highest quality. And again, they're issued by registries that are globally accepted. And that's what things that our buyers are looking for. On the compliance space, it's much more clear, right? Because in the regulatory side, the governments, they dictate all the rules and what these credits need to look like and what and how they're produced. So this is also why the compliance market is much bigger and the value of the credits are much higher as well. The average compliance credit in the EU, for example, is roughly 100 euros right now. And if you look at the Canadian market, there's a program called Low Carbon Fuel Standard in British Columbia. So the average price there is 459 Canadian dollars, and that's what it was in October. And we actually have the gentleman who developed and ran the LCFS program in British Columbia, working with DevvStream as well.
You mentioned the difference between compliance market and the voluntary market, and the government bodies that kind of dictate how the compliance market works. But is there a primary framework emerging within the voluntary market that kind of sets the global standard for what a quality voluntary carbon credit market looks like, or is that still something that's up in the air?
No, there are groups that are trying to create a lot more structure around it to ensure the higher quality. But there's also groups that, like in the United Nations, for example, under the Paris Agreement, is stating that carbon credits need to be tradable between countries. So that way, developing nations who don't really have as much emissions but are getting affected by it can produce credits that would be bought by developed nations at a higher price. So these are called ITMOS credits, and these are ones that we're working on as well too. So we are working with developing nations to create ITMOS credits that are generally going to be worth more and in much more demand, because countries are also making net zero claims, and in order for them to meet their goals, they also have to buy carbon credits as well too.
And just along the same lines, you mentioned the net zero goals, and you touched on it earlier, but what is the ultimate impact, or what role is the carbon credit market going to play in actually achieving the some of the arguably very ambitious goals that are set by both corporate issuers as well as governments abroad?
Yeah, the way to look at it, if you look at companies or even countries, there's only so much that a company or country can do to bring down their emissions, right? As long as there's buildings and there's factories and transportation, until the whole world is fully running on renewable energy and everything's electrified, you're always going to have emissions. So that's why you look at companies like a Google or Microsoft, for example, and where they don't really manufacture anything, but they have their offices, their facilities, their servers. They're still generating carbon emissions, even though they become much more efficient and they lower their levels. Well, that the last piece of it needs to come from carbon credits. Countries is even more challenging, right? Because countries, you have your building infrastructure, you have all your transportation, you have your people. So again, they can make a lot of improvements where, like a city can electrify their buses, but then there's still other transportations that maybe are not. And again, in order to bring it down, then they have to purchase credits. This is why this market is so massive. It's because it's relevant to just about any company, organization, and country in the world. Either you're going to need to buy carbon credits because you have net zero goals, or you're doing things that are eligible to generate carbon credits. And that's why the variety of organizations we talk to bears everything from consumer goods organizations to automotive companies to retail channels and even sport teams. And so that's what makes this really interesting as well. And that's why, DevvStream should be an interesting company for some investors to take a look at, just because we get our hands into so many different spaces and different areas.
Okay, that's a good time to segue into kind of some of the specifics about the company. So let's take a step back, give you the 2 minutes to kind of brag a little bit. What was the motivation behind the founding of the company? And then tell me a little bit about the team that is, that joins you on the day-to-day, because you've got a pretty impressive bench there. So I think it's a good time to point that out.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. Really, so I have an engineering background, and most of my team are engineers as well too. We have 4 PhDs in our team, right? And that's why we focus on technology as opposed to nature-based. Majority of the carbon credits up to this point comes from nature-based, and it's not right or wrong. It's just kind of how the industry evolved, and nature-based is extremely important. However, in order for us to meet our net zero goals, studies have been done that shows that nature-based will only address up to 20% of the solutions necessary. The other 80% needs to come from technology. And that just happens to intersect with our DNA. So for me, how this came about was I spent a lot of time in the semiconductor space working with renewable energy companies and energy efficiency companies. And they were struggling because they couldn't compete against fossil fuels. Fossil fuels was just too inexpensive. And as I became more aware of that and started working with the ESG teams, and back then it was called CSR, or corporate social responsibility, really stumbled upon this thing called carbon credits and realized this is a really interesting financial vehicle to help bridge that gap between renewables and the fossil fuels. And so the more I spoke to these companies about it, the more I realized they didn't understand how to utilize it, how to generate it. And that if we came in and provided a service, most of these companies would jump on it in a heartbeat, because we're providing additional streams of revenue to help again offset that cost differential, and doing it in a way that really doesn't increase their costs or and to really help them advance their technologies further. So that's where the whole company kind of came together. And then as we started meeting additional individuals, there weren't really any other companies focused on technology. And so that's why we have a lot of really interesting people joining our team. For example, our head of carbon, David Oliver, he's spent well over a decade working in energy generation for companies like Eaton, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. He spent well over a decade in the carbon markets throughout his career, just because, again, energy generation, especially renewable energies, are eligible for carbon credits, and that's how you offset some of the costs. So David Oliver's actually been asked to lead Canada's National Carbon Association. He works with multiple countries and provinces, advising the premiers and presidents as well on their carbon programs. We also have Dr. Destiny Knock, who has a PhD in environmental engineering and sustainability policies. So she also works with governments and have done multiple papers. And 3 of us are actually here in COP28 right now in Dubai. We have multiple panels that we're talking on, and also various keynotes and so forth. So really, again, really smart people on our team. And then the last person I want to highlight is Michael Rensing. So he's one of our PhDs, is Dr. Destiny Knock. Michael developed and ran the LCFS program in British Columbia for well over a decade. That's a low carbon fuel standard. And it's the most successful carbon mitigation program in all of Canada. And so he joined our team as well too, because he really liked what we were doing.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions from the audience, and then I know this might be kind of backtracking because you may have mentioned it, but if someone's participating, I want to make sure they get all the questions that they have answered. So can you go and remind us what the total size of the carbon credit market is? And, let's take that a bit further and try to identify what is your specific opportunity set within that. And if you could go so far as to kind of break down the nuances of your business model between the co-development and kind of facilitation elements of your business and what that opportunity looks like for you.
Sure. So again, the carbon market today is in 2023 expected to be $1.16 trillion and growing to 2.68 trillion by 2028. This is the amount of carbon credits that have been bought and sold and retired. So where we come in is we co-develop carbon credits by taking and working with technology partners who have either technologies or activities that are eligible for carbon credits, and majority of them don't know how to do it. I'll share with you one example. We have one company we have an MOU with right now. They're a company called Ryoden. They're a $2 billion distributor of electronic products out of Japan, and it's a subsidiary of Mitsubishi. So here's somebody with massive resources. And what they do is they sell products like EV chargers, high efficiency HVAC systems, high efficiency refrigeration systems. Again, all these things can generate carbon credits. Well, they weren't able to do it themselves. They weren't able to find anybody within their team or the Mitsubishi team. So they ended up coming back to us after I met with them. And they said, yeah, we want to work with you because you guys are the experts in doing something like this. So our model, we have two models. The model that where most of our business is working with companies like Ryoden, we would go and act as the co-developers to manage the entire process of generating the carbon credits and monetizing it. And we take a 25% cut typically. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, depending on the complexity and the size of the projects. But what makes it interesting for everybody is the companies that we partner with, this is a stream of revenue that they weren't expecting or know how to get anyways. And for us, we don't charge anything. So for them, it's zero risk. So we do that with municipalities as well. So we have some cities that we've signed where we go in, meet with the city planner and the mayor, identify all activities that the city's doing and bring in revenue to them and help offset some of that cost rather than them going to taxpayers. So we have one city in Canada, for example, in Canada that is electrifying their municipal buses. They have 455 buses and they weren't generating carbon credits for any of this. So we would go in and manage the entire process for them. So that's going to be the majority of our business. And it's pretty lucrative because once we create the program and register the projects, these streams of credit will go for at least 10 years, sometimes up to 20 years. And so it becomes like an annuity and we just have to maintain it. The other part of our business, John, is we do have some projects that need some upfront investments where we'll go in and do that. And where we invest, we'll keep the majority of the credits. So for example, we have programs for plugging oil wells. Each oil well requires some investment to plug, but we would keep 90% to 100% of the credits for making that investment. And the market in that right there alone, I mean, in the US, there's roughly, depending on who you talk to, 3 to 4 million abandoned and orphaned oil wells in the US alone. So all these little areas that we participate in, they're all massive.
That's great. Thank you. Can you expand on what the current contracted portfolio looks like and also what the kind of growth baked into that? If you were to do nothing else in the way of business development and additional project securing, what could you see as far as growth within just, execution alone of the projects that you have in hand today?
Sure. So we are a public company, and so we do have forecasts out there as well too. We expect to be cash flow positive next year with an EBITDA in the mid millions, and then growing to roughly 40 million EBITDA in 2025, if I remember the numbers correctly. And it's changed a little bit, but the way our model works, we have contracts with technology partners who have certain things that are eligible for carbon credits. So for example, we have one company that we have a contract with that will reduce the energy consumption in wastewater treatment by up to 83%. And so every city in the world does wastewater treatment. So we're in the process of putting together a proposal for one city in Canada. But once this is proven out, well, there's dozens of other cities lined up. So we have that type of program. We have a program around buildings efficiency, for example. So we have contracts around that where if a building does anything like improve their HVAC system, so that they upgrade it and they use one that's less energy consuming. We can generate carbon credits from that. We created what's called a program approach, where rather than submitting and registering one of these projects at a time, we do this for all of North America. So this way, anytime a new building is getting upgraded, or even new building being built that are much more sustainable, we can roll them into our program and generate credits immediately, where the process typically would take 12 to 18 months. So as far as where we're going, think of how many cities need wastewater treatment. Well, every single one does, and most cities have multiple wastewater treatment plants. Think of how many buildings are out there. We also have like industrial efficiency programs for factories. Think of how many factories are out there as well too. So we just keep rolling into our program and then adding more cities as well too. For example, we have a partnership with Global Green, who they're a nonprofit, and they work with 28 cities in the U.S. alone that they've put together strategic ESG and sustainability plans. Well, this would be part of that plan as well, so we can sign those 28 cities once we get up and running. So the scalability for something like this, John, is quite high, because technology is very easy to scale, where you just see cut and paste. Unlike nature-based, where every forest, for example, every mangrove is very unique.
Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so there's a couple of more from the audience and a couple of key things I also want to touch on. First is, very quickly, who do you compete against? And then can we also get an update on the current transaction that was announced several months back about your business combination transaction?
Yeah, so really, we don't compete against too many people, because like I said, the other carbon project developers are focused on nature-based. And again, it's not right or wrong, that's just what they're focused on. So what we do is something that's very novel and that's very new. And that's why I showed the example with Ryoden, why they were able to find anybody to do what we do. And we've actually even met with other technology partners that have gone and talked to experts in the carbon market. But again, they're on the nature-based side, and they were told that you can't generate carbon credits from these technologies they're doing. And kind of chuckle. It's like, well, obviously that's not true, because we're in the process of doing that. So, and as far as the transaction, yeah. So right now we're publicly listed on Canada on the CBOE exchange and on the OTCQB market as well. But we've recently signed a BCA, an agreement with a NASDAQ listed SPAC, Focused Impact, and they've been a great partner. And we're in the process of filing our S4, and then hopefully it should be a smooth transaction with the SEC. And the goal is to have it done by sometime early next year.
Can you tell us a little bit about the primary motivations for the uplisting transaction in general?
Yeah, the Canadian market, as great as it is, it's relatively small, and there's not a lot of liquidity for our shares. So by going onto the NASDAQ, it gives us access to a lot more capital. And right now we feel that we have probably like a 2-year head start on the technology carbon credit side. So with additional capital, we can bring on additional people, additional headcount, and also create more programs and lock in a lot more of these contracts. Because these carbon streams that I mentioned, they typically are at least 10 years. So if we have a 2-year head start and we bring on enough resources and capture more cities, capture more buildings, we're gonna be locked up for the next 10 years. And so that gives us a huge advantage over any other company as well too. Plus, we would be the first and only carbon company on NASDAQ. So I think that's gonna bring a lot of attention as well too.
There's one more clarification question around the actual monetization. So can you tell me a little bit about how you generate carbon credits, they are brought on, held on your books. Do you monetize immediately, and who are the partners that you have that are standing ready by and to purchase these, and how often does that happen?
Yeah, so the goal is to monetize them immediately, or as soon as possible. And we have a couple options. So the first is a partnership we have with one of the largest voluntary carbon exchange in the world, Expansive. Their former chairman, Will Stewart, was on our board as well too. So we have very tight ties, and we're working on some projects with their former CEO. But Expansive, it's like any exchange. Once we generate the credits, we put it onto the exchange. We've gone through our KYC with them, and we're onboarded already. So we can put our credits on there for anyone who needs carbon credits to buy. But we expect that majority of our credits will be done direct with companies like the ones I mentioned before that buys carbon credits. the Googles, Microsoft of the world. We do have agreements in place already. Before we even generate the first credit, we have one large global energy company come in and give us an offtake order over the next 3 years for compliance credits in Canada, in British Columbia, and in Alberta. And so this has been publicly announced, but the order was for 250,000 credits over the next 3 years with an option for additional 400,000 credits. And to give you an idea of the compliance pricing in Canada today, it's $65 this year, moving to $80 next year, and going by $15 every year until it's $170 by 2030. So that's the general federal compliance OBPS program. And then we also have the Alberta tier, and then also the British Columbia one as well too. And then I mentioned the LCFS, they're going for like 459 Canadian dollars. And then there's a CFR program as well, carbon clean fuel regulation, I'm sorry. That's going to be expected to be roughly 350 Canadian dollars. So you see these contracts are pretty sizable. And we actually have another group that's looking to want to purchase as well too. So yeah, I think we feel that because the credits we generate are high quality, there's going to be quite a bit of demand for it.
Excellent. Well, we're short on time, so I just want to say thanks very much for joining us today. I think the next event is at 10:30. It's Haverty's. But before you go, Suddy, can you just tell investors where they can find more information, maybe the website for DevvStream, and then anything else you want to add before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, so DevvStream.com is the website. And you can see the name on my background and as well. And if you have direct questions, feel free to email us. John, what's the easiest thing? Was it info@devvstream.com? I think that
DevvStream, DEVVSTREAM at ICRinc.com will go to both, everyone that you need to get them to.
great.
All right,
Yeah, that's
thanks
perfect.
very much.
Thank you,
We
John.
appreciate it.